So I've gotten a lot of questions about how it came to be that I was here at Elite FTS. I took on Dave as a client this year, and how this relationship kind of came to transpire. So basically what happened was I met Dave for the first time in 2015. What's going on, guys? Dr. John Rusin here. I'm taking live questions over on Facebook and also Instagram over on my Dr. John Rusin page and also on Elite FTS. So as we're shooting these, we're taking them live, and I'm going to be reading off question by question, trying to drop some knowledge on these subjects and hopefully help everybody out in the process. So first question, thoughts on foam rolling pre-workout or in the pre-warm-up or post-warm-up? So the way that I use foam rolling specifically in our warm-up patterns are in the 6-phase dynamic warm-up sequence. It's something that we use for a structure for Dave's warm-ups, and basically it brings you through all the way from foam rolling up to CNS prep. Number one in the 6-phase warm-up is foam rolling, but what we don't want to be doing is sitting there for 45 minutes foam rolling every single nook and crevice of our bodies. What we need to be doing is getting in, determining a linchpin of pain or dysfunction, and focusing in 1 to 2 minutes on that said area. So if that said area is your hip flexors, you are going to be hitting your hip flexors for all 2 minutes, and then you're going to be moving on from there. But in that pre-training sequence, really there's a limited role for foam rolling, but it is an important role if we can get on the right thing. Again, we're going to have more parasympathetic nervous system stimulation there, and if that's your goal, if you're coming in super jacked up before you're going in to train, sometimes we need to down-regulate the neuromuscular system. So this is a great way to do it. My most preferred way to go in and foam roll is during a recovery-based session that happens after the workout itself, but also in a secondary recovery session that happens 4 to 6 hours later. This is something that we call global foam rolling. So we're using the more superficial muscles of the body, the pecs, the lats, the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes, the big ones, and we're going to be using more of like a pizza dough foam rolling back and forth, and we're really just trying to stimulate the parasympathetic response, but also trying to get a little bit more of edema formation out of the extremities back up into central circulation so we can excrete it from the body and really limit that huge amount of inflammatory response after training. Next question here. I have to read this one because I think it's actually pretty funny. Can you speak for more than 2 minutes without dropping an F-bomb? Yes, I can, and there actually are times and places in which I don't speak with profanity, but a greatest thing about what Dave and I are doing here is it's 100% organic. As I speak into 2 cameras right now, this is more of a stage thing, but as I work with Dave, as I coach Dave, as we have authentic conversations, it's happening between 2 individuals. That's how coaches speak, that's how Dave and I speak on a day-to-day, and I'd be faking it otherwise. So if you guys do hear more of that stuff, that's the reason why. Obviously, if I get up and I'm doing a research symposium, I'm presenting in front of 1,000 people, I'm not going to be dropping F-bombs on a day-to-day basis, but for my coaching and my niche demographic of the fitness industry, that's what gets the best response. And again, it's more organic and it's more real to the way that I coach, the way that I speak, and the way that I communicate. So I'd be faking it otherwise. Next question, on a little bit more of a positive note here. Advice for programming the deadlift around a herniated disc. So this is an interesting one because a disc herniation, usually that's something that is either diagnosed in orthopedic evaluation, but is more prevalent in a diagnostic on imaging like an MRI. So guys, remember that you are not your MRI. That is one snippet of time in which you get an image on your body. It does not correlate into function, and it really doesn't correlate into pain as we look at the statistics that we've had for the last 10 years or so, trying to look at these 2 variables interplaying. Around 50% of the population is walking the earth today with multiple disc herniations that are 100% pain-free. The other 50% of the population has a clean MRI, aka no disc herniations, and they're actually having lower back pain bouts. So it's a coin flip, it's 50-50, just pointing to the fact that even if you do have multiple disc herniations, it is not a death sentence to your training, and it's not a death sentence in your functionality. So take it with a grain of salt. I usually don't go in and look at imaging for more than what it is. Function, movement, are things that we have at our disposal that we can actually train through more intelligently, and that's things that we need to be focusing in on. Again, guys, like Tyler Durden said in Fight Club, you are not your fucking khakis. Truly, with MRIs, you are not your fucking MRI. So just remember that, and don't be a self-fulfilling prophecy to a piece of paper in front of you. All right, so next question coming in from Danny Overcash, another Elite FTS Pro member here. Her question was, what are the best couple things that I've done to grow as a professional? And Danny's a physical therapist. I went to physical therapy school as well. But I have to say, like, the best thing that I did to grow as a professional was learn from other professionals outside of my niche specialty. So as you go through graduate school and whatever your endeavors are, it's like you have a laser focus in on this one tiny niche of the industry. But we need to become generalists before we become really great specialists. So being able to learn from many different areas of the fitness industry, whether it be physical therapy, strength and conditioning, powerlifting, bodybuilding, nutrition, you name it, trying to take as much from everything else and try to systemize it into my systems, the ones that we currently use today. That's been the best thing that I think that has paid off dividends on my day-to-day basis working with athletes. That and being able to get experience to the point where your gut instinct as a coach really leads your path in terms of diagnostics or in terms of programming. Really sound communication patterns, not only verbally, but just using your eyes, your ears, your gut instinct. That's something that's developed with time, and it just comes with reps and it comes with years of training athletes. Okay, next question. What are some benchmarks for core strength? Side plank times, holds times, other times? Really what I look for in core strength is the ability to dominate the pillar complex, meaning the shoulders, the hips, the core integrating together as a functional unit. Over my career, the best thing that I've possibly used to look at this from more of an objective standpoint is actually using your body, moving through space and locomotion, AKA walking, and more so walking under loading. So I did a study last year. It was actually published in the NSCA journal, and it was the first peer-reviewed study of its kind that looked at loaded carries and placing a metric on the demographic which was actually using it. So in a pain or rehabilitation demographic, really a gold standard for core strength is being able to carry 50% of your body weight within your hands for 30 seconds of duration. If you look one step up from that in a general fitness population, being able to carry 100% of your body weight for 30 seconds. Last one, and the highest level, would be being able to carry 200% of your body weight for 30 seconds, and that is for elite sports performance. Now, everyone always gets butthurt about this because they go, whoa, hold on a second, 200% of body weight. That means that a 200-pound man has to carry 400 pounds with sound and succinct core and pillar complex function and stability, again, for 30 seconds. Not everybody's an elite performer, but from what I've seen since this study has been published, since the article has been published, that people that are true high performers, 200% of body weight is no big deal for them. So while we don't really have to focus on that for general fitness, what we do need to focus on is using a relative strength metric for the loaded carries as an overall way to really just try to look at global function of goals. So we can reduce body fat, we can improve neural dynamics, we can improve body composition, and all that will lead to having a better carry metric over time. All right, next question. How would you address imbalances as a result of lifting? Well, guess what, guys? Imbalances are not just a result of lifting. They're also a result of being a human being. Look at me in this chair right now. I'm sitting here with flexed hips, flexed upper spine, internally rotated shoulders, protracted shoulders, forward head posture, but we're all sitting for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. We're using handheld technologies, we're working on the computers, and then we're going in and lifting. You know, 10 years ago, they said that you should be doing 2 times as much posterior chain work as anterior chain work. But 10 years ago, we didn't have Instagram. Well, we really need to be working that up to 3 times as much pulling as pushing. And then for most part, at the upper body, we need to be doing 2 times as much rowing horizontally as we do pulling from like a pull-up vertically. So those are the Rusin pain-free shoulder training ratios. 3 times as much pulling as pushing and 2 times as much horizontal pulling as vertical pulling. If you can stay within those and you can really build those into your training program, those are things that can reverse some poor posturing, but can also get you out of those imbalances that you're talking about. Next question. What type of training split and training volume do you recommend for women trying to stabilize and strengthen their shoulder and their scapula? So let's just start off with, you can't strengthen your scapula, you can't strengthen your shoulder. These things are bones. We're not strengthening the bones, we're strengthening the muscular units around them. So specific to the scap, we have 17 muscles that attach into the scap and then articulate around the shoulder complex itself. These are tiny, intricate muscles, and honestly they can be trained on a daily basis. So when you talk about training splits, you should literally be doing something that brings your shoulders back into retraction, downward rotation, and depression of the scapula on a daily basis, no matter what kind of lifting that you have planned for that day and that day's indicator strength lift. Whether you're deadlifting, bench pressing, going for a walk on the treadmill, we really need to be working the back sides of the shoulders there with a huge amount of frequency, but more so a huge amount of volume as well. Because these muscles are postural stabilizers, they respond extremely well to a lot of stress and a lot of cumulative based stress, meaning that we're going to train hypertrophy, we're going to train metabolic stress, because that's where these tissues are going to have the best response to actually be trained as they need to be trained as tonic stabilizers in the system, not phasic movers. Next question. How much pain is okay to ignore? So ignore is not really a good way to look at this. We should never be ignoring pain, because pain is definitely a signal that's telling our body that something's not right. I think what you mean to ask is, like, what is a level of pain that is okay to train through, and what's something that we need to just put on the brakes and actually make some changes in our training. One of the most subjective things in the world is pain. The second most subjective thing in the world is movement. When you add these two things together, you have a highly, highly subjective thing, which we call training. But really what we're looking at is having a subjective pain scale, 0 being no pain, 10 being you're going to the fucking emergency room ASAP. We're looking at like 1 to 2 being acceptable to train through. You know, people are gonna have just day-to-day chronic aches and pains. That's okay. But if you're having pathological pain, meaning that you have huge amounts of pain, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 pain, or you have radiculopathies, you have numbness, you have tingling, you have traveling pain coming down through your extremities, that's stuff that you need a professional diagnosis with. Guys, you only get one body. So make sure that you take care of it and you actually go and seek out professional help, as Dave's been doing for many, many years now, if you actually need it. Because if you want to train for a lifetime, we are going to have bumps in the road. We need to be able to get through those bumps, strengthen based off of the data that your body is giving you in a pain signal, and then just continue to move forward intelligently as opposed to just driving straight into pain with our training. Next question. Would you suggest that more powerlifters need to utilize single leg movements for glute activation like you talked about with Dave? So single leg movements aren't all about glute activation. I do think that single leg training is super important for everybody, but it's even more so important for powerlifters because we are in a bilateral dominant sport. And again, it's not about going absolutely ham on your single leg work. As we've done with Dave, just the novelty of throwing single leg patterns back into the mix, they've unlocked his ability to actually utilize lateral posterior hip stability again and link it back with the core. So again, single leg for me is more of like an orthopedic indicator lift, meaning that we're using it to build up motor control, building up a skill set around single leg training. Once we do that, yes, we can use it for accessory work and we can meaningfully train for hypertrophy and for a training stimulus. But really for powerlifting, especially if you haven't done a whole lot of single leg training in your career, just throwing it into a dynamic warm-up sequence or throwing it on the back end of some accessory work, just the novelty effect itself will just link up so many segments that is really just truly low-hanging fruit, picking it off the tree in terms of trying to keep your lower back, your hips, and your knees healthy through the process of powerlifting. How were you able to train consistently while in physical therapy school? I would like to be able to continue to train and compete while I attend PT school in the future, but with the high course load, is it not feasible to train meaningfully at a level where I would compete at an amateur or pro level? Okay, using myself as an avatar here, what I did was a little bit differently. So I not only trained while I was in PT school, I actually worked a job and 2 jobs at one point while I was in PT school. I was a strength and conditioning coach at a high school. I volunteered over at the college for a number of years, and I trained personally while everyone else ate lunch. So I was in school 10 hours a day. You know, DPT curriculum is pretty hectic. Like, there's no doubt about that. But I spent my off time where everyone else was kind of bullshitting around, and I actually trained 75 minutes every single day. And that includes weekends as well, because again, if you're in graduate school, you're going to be in the library every Saturday, every Sunday. It comes down to what's your top priority. For me at the time, it was continuing to build my body, but also build my mind, knowing that if I trained, if I continued to do what I enjoyed to do, I could give more to my schoolwork, I could give more to my coaching, and it really ingrained a lifestyle almost 10 years ago now that is something that I still do today. Dave and I were talking about it this morning, and the reason that we train is not only so we can have these huge numbers in the gym, it's about enhancing our lifestyles as businessmen, as professionals, as fathers, as husbands. It really solidifies an entire lifestyle, and if that's your mindset of continuing to train, you're gonna find a way to do it. Next question, what are the best methods to rehab inner elbow pain, aka golfer's elbow? Usually people like intermix golfers and tennis elbow together. People really don't know which one is which. So let's just say like generalized tendinitis of the elbows. It's a really common thing. So you have pain around here, you have pain around here. One of the things that I've seen over the course of my career that's really not shown in the science yet, but I think it will be, is a lack of grip strength, a lack of upper arm training correlating to chronic elbow pain, both medially and laterally. So one of the best ways to actually bulletproof against some of these pain responses is by going in and actually training arms, training forearms, training your grip, and doing some carry work. This is very, very simple stuff. I think it was 4 years ago, I wrote an article on T Nation about the best ways to fend off elbow pain. And my number 1 recommendation was increase grip strength and actually train your arms. Sometimes we forget that there's muscles in the arms. There's biceps, there's triceps, there's forearm muscles. These things have a key role in the kinetic chain. So if they're kinking and they're ending up in elbow pain here, we need to be training around this. And locally training some of these muscles has huge implications for long-term pain-free prevention in terms of trying to bulletproof your elbows. Next question, what are some of the best ways to rehab chronic shoulder pain? So I touched upon this in another question, but it's really important to place a vast majority of your shoulder training volume on the posterior chain. Not enough people do enough posterior chain dominant shoulder work. So I'm talking about band pull-aparts here, face pulls, rear delt flies, building in a huge amount of volume there. Remember that we can only be as strong as we are stable on the backside of the body. So the bigger, the thicker, the more stable we can make the upper back, the more potential that we have to be a powerful presser on the front side of the body. So once you have those training ratio and those training volumes really dialed in, we need to be finding a pain-free pressing variation that we can gravitate towards. Usually, if you've had chronic pain with the barbell, you've had chronic pain with any bench press variations, the move is very, very simple. Let's get our ass off the bench, let's get our chest facing the floor, let's get our hands on the floor, and let's re-implement a closed kinetic chain with push-up variations. Now, I don't want you to go through and be getting 20, 30, 40 reps of push-ups in a set. That doesn't line up very well to, again, those shoulder training ratios. What I want you to do is rebuild your push-up pattern and then start loading it meaningfully. Throw some chains on your back, get a plate on your back, put a band around your shoulders, load it up and actually challenge it. Those are the things that are going to be able to really rewire your neuromuscular system, get you into a good position where you can use the push as a full body movement, not just an upper body dominant press pattern, which is the biggest mistake most people make on the bench press. All right, next question. As the chicken or the egg theory goes, what do you find more important to work on first? Stability or mobility in a program ultimately working towards increased strength? It's funny that you asked this question because Dave and I were literally just talking about this off camera between sessions that we were doing on this programming. And really what it comes down to is people having a misconception of the mobility stability continuum. Let's break it down. When a baby is first born, their first movements utilize mobility first. Usually the head is the first thing to move. They move before they can stabilize around those positions. But over the first 2 to 3 years of a normalized developmental sequence, that polar shifts. So it goes totally into the opposite direction to the point where when you're dealing with adults, it usually becomes more of a stability issue before a mobility issue. But that's really a novel thought because many times in our industry, we're always chasing mobility as a fix-all for everything. But remember, at one point in time, we had the mobility to do things that we needed to do. More times than not, we have something called a neural lock that happens. So our body perceives threat and it locks down an entire region, if not the entire body. It restricts smooth, authentic motion from happening. Taking the shoulders and the hips, for example, those are two of the biggest joints in the body, the most inherently mobile joints in the body, but also regions that people are always chasing mobility with. We have ball and socket based joints with infinite degrees of freedom here. We don't need more mobility here. We need more stability on the other sides of the equation so we can actually display the mobility that we have at the shoulders and at the hips. So if we kind of look at it like that, we're working on mobility and stability within this continuum simultaneously together. But putting chicken or the egg first, truly if you're an adult and you have had previous function and gone through a normalized developmental sequence, you should be really trying to solidify your stability first so you can grade back in the usable mobility that will again dynamically transfer into any strength endeavors that you have. Next question here from Robert. How do you assess, test, screen your clients before putting together a program for them? All right, guys. Not every single assessment is going to take 16 hours the way that Dave's did. That's usually not feasible for 99.9% of the coaches and the personal trainers out there. I get it. But really, I think that if you have a first session, you should be utilizing a fourth to a half of that first session with your clients actually in taking movement data. Whether you do that in standardized form with a movement screen of some sort, the one that I use is the functional movement screen, that is a great way to just get the ball rolling again to yield data points that can start being used in programming. But really, I go from that functional movement screen to just make sure that we don't have any red flag issues that we need to address before we get into training. And then really our dynamic warm-up in those first couple sessions, the on-ramp, so to say, that becomes our continuous diagnostic and our continuous assessment and screen. And really that goes along forever as long as you still have that client in front of you. The way that they walk through the door on a daily basis, their movement patterning, the way that they're holding their shoulders, their facial expressions, it's a continuous diagnostic. And that's what the best coaches in the world do at a very, very high level, keeping their athletes progressing for strength endeavors, for power endeavors, but also keeping them healthy in the process. Next question. Hey, Dr. John, hoping to get more specific recommendations for rest recovery days. Currently doing low intensity steady state for 30 minutes and want to mix it up. All right, so my athletes do not have true off days, meaning that they're always going to be doing something in programming. That doesn't mean that they're going to go max effort squat every single day, but it means that we always have something to work on. Again, if you have a goal, if you have pain, if you have dysfunction, if you're planning to perform, whatever it is, you always can do something to push yourself forward. And I'm a big believer that there's no true passive recovery. Active recovery can always stimulate better than passive. So a nice phasic system that I've used in the past is using a more deliberate, a more generalized foam rolling for about 5 to 15 minutes, going through doing some biphasic stretching on those same tissues throughout the body, and then implementing in some low intensity, low impact, steady state cardio on top of that. I really look for a bare minimum of 10 minutes all the way up into 60 minutes. After that, we try to bring the whole system back down because, again, we're trying to spark parasympathetic response in the central nervous system here. One of the best ways to do it, especially after walking or low intensity, low impact, steady state cardio, is to get in and actually work on your breath itself. I like to get into a posturally dependent position on your back, feet elevated, hands elevated, eyes closed. nice and quiet environment, and actually do some deep parasympathetic breathing. So we can do it in many different tempos, but usually using a 4-second inhale in, a 4-second hold at the top, and then a 6 to 8 second exhalation out. That will be a breath that takes about 4 to 6 breaths per minute to complete. If we can bring our respiratory rate down to that point of 4 to 6 breaths per minute, our other vital metrics are going to follow. Our heart rate are going to go down, pupils are going to go down and restrict, we're going to get better localized blood flow going into the gut, and we're going to be able to actually spark the recovery in terms of not just riding that sympathetic wave the entire time, which really leads to chronic inflammation, chronic fatigue, burnout, and injuries for the long term. Next question. Best 3 exercises to train overall rotator cuff stability and strength. Also, what is, in his opinion, the best subscapularis strengthening exercise? All right, so the rotator cuff. We have 4 muscular tendinous junctions that lead into the rotator cuff. The prime role of the rotator cuff is not to work one at a time, but to actually work as a functioning unit together. So all 4 of these muscles need to contract in order to stabilize and to centrate the glenohumeral joint. So the humerus here, the ball is here, and the glenoid fossa is the cup in which it articulates. The goal of the rotator cuff, when functioning ideally, is to place this ball and socket as centralized as possible. When we can do that, it unlocks the ability for the bigger dynamic movers like the deltoid, like the pec, like the lat, to actually alter the position of the humerus, very simply. So I say that because we need to be training the rotator cuff as a functional unit in terms of generating stability and also strength. Strength is a hard one because it's not like you're going to get a super jacked infraspinatus or you're going to get a super jacked subscapularis. We're not training these things for hypertrophy. What we're training them for is to be very agile and to turn them on when we want them to turn on. The tricep that I use with all of my athletes 3 to 4 days a week minimum is the tricep of band over and backs, banded face pulls, banded pull aparts. 10 reps apiece, 2 to 3 times through that tricep. You're going to build in about 100 reps of dynamic shoulder stability centralized around that rotator cuff before you ever go in and bench press or deadlift or do anything like that. It also really helps out the scaps. It helps out in bringing the rotator cuff together with the scap and really combining the full shoulder complex as a unit, as opposed to just doing these things back and forth and really just wasting your time in the process. Next question, how would you build up your referral network as a personal trainer and have to network out with a physical therapist to refer out to? This is an easy one, guys. So if you're a personal trainer, if you're a strength coach, you should be training yourself. You should have a physical practice that is part of your lifestyle. If you have a physical practice that is part of your lifestyle, we all know that we have aches and pains and some injuries that flare up every once in a while. When that does happen to you, who is your go-to person that will get you back into the game, get you back training, get you back feeling good? Whoever you personally go to is the person that you should be sending your clients to. Never send your clients out to a chiro, to a physical therapist, to a massage therapist that you've never personally used. It's just the same as you've never teach a movement that you've never had success with yourself. So you need to be walking the walk before you actually utilize these referral networks. But the best thing about it is that if you actually refer out to kind of those allied healthcare professionals, if you do a good job with them, if you make a great relationship and you're one of their clients, guess what? They have a lot of people that are going to be coming off of rehab wanting to go back in and train, and they're going to be sending you everyone that they know because, again, you buy into their system. That's called synergy, the cyclical process back and forth. Referring is not out and never coming back. Referring is a cyclical process that happens over and over and over again. But just make sure that you are sending people to somebody who you believe in and you've had success with yourself. So next question is about Dave being 50 years old right now and him finally starting to buy into the process of longevity, feeling good, being able to actually build your body up so it can function for you. But the question is more about like, how do you make that mental shift if you're 20 years old, you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, and you're more focused on aesthetics or you're more focused on bar weight? Really, it comes down to living and learning. I hate to say it, but people have to make a change in their mind before they actually make a change to their body. And usually what happens is you have burnout happen, you have injuries happen, and you're forced to make the changes. Just because of the demographic that I work with, a very niche population, very similar to Dave, I see people that they say to me after working with us for a year, 2 years, 3 years, I wish I would have done this when I was 25. I wish I would have done this when I was 35. I hate to say it, but yeah, you should have. But there is so much more to it than that. You know, you can always play Monday morning quarterback on this stuff, but many times we have to know our capabilities. We need to know what not to do so we can fine tune it. The biggest thing is being able to get it to a point where if you do hit stagnation, if you do hit pain or injuries, or you hit a huge plateau, you're in good enough orthopedic and systemic health where you can actually pull yourself out of the hole and build a lifestyle for yourself around training, around physicality that you can continue on with. You never want to get training or what you love to do taken away from you. And many times we're at risk of having that happen. So being able to step back just a tiny bit, and I know it's super hard for many people. It was hard for me when I stopped playing as well. It's not always about performance. Performance is a slower uptick when you have more of the longevity mindset, but that's fine. If you plan on lifting when you're 50, when you're 60, when you're 70, you always have to ask yourself the question, is this set that I'm about to do, is this next rep gonna get me closer to doing what I wanna do long term? And it's a humbling thing to go through and ask yourself that question over and over again, but if you're doing some stupid shit, asking yourself that question is really gonna check your ego at the door and have you kind of fine tune what you're about to do in your training, what you're about to do in your programming, and just moving forward in your entire training career. So I've gotten a lot of questions about how it came to be that I was here at Elite FTS. I took on Dave as a client this year, and how this relationship kind of came to transpire. So basically what happened was I met Dave for the first time in 2015. We were both presenting at the Swiss Symposium up in Mississauga, Canada. And we had a really great conversation just about family, about life, not really even about training. But ever since that moment, you know, my wife was there as well. I was always a big fan of Dave, but I started to really learn more from him, not even on a training side of thing, but more of just like a lifestyle thing, a mindset thing, being a business owner, being somebody who's a really high performer, but also doing what he loves to do, which is train. So, you know, I've been following it from afar for many, many years now, but Dave actually custom outfitted my entire facility in Madison, Wisconsin. Put the racks together. We got 5 to 125 on the dumbbells. We got lat pull downs. We got specialty bars. We got everything. And once that thing was finally in, I was so thrilled with it that I thought, hey, I'm just gonna hit up Dave. I'm gonna write him a 2-line email and just say thanks so much. You know, my clients, my family, everybody's really enjoying the space that you guys did for us, and it looks fucking sick. And that kind of opened up the conversation a little bit. We went back and forth a couple times on email, not about training yet, but after a couple emails back and forth, Dave ended up asking like, hey, I need to ask you a couple questions about my training because I think that I need to start making some changes. Let me know when you're available. And I literally had my phone on me, as I do most times, and I texted back via email and I said, hey, whenever's good, let's jump on the phone. This was in December. So in a matter of 2 to 3 days, we had about a 3-hour phone call, and that transpired into me coming out to Elite FTS about 2 weeks later, and Dave just jumping in 2 feet full into the deep end with a functional hypertrophy training model, getting back into a longevity mindset with the training. And after shooting a couple segments today, we haven't gotten in and trained yet, but I've been getting updates week by week. I'm really excited that Dave actually made that decision because I think it's something that he's been playing around with for many, many years, but it's something that just a simple email, a simple back and forth correspondence of saying thank you, and then Dave actually asking for something like, hey, I need to pick your brain on this, and me not being like, hey, I'll talk to you in 2 months when I have an opening in my schedule, but me sending back an email and being able to get on the phone a day or two later. the process really came to head very, very quickly there. And I think it's something that not a whole lot of people talk about. It's the most unsexy thing in the world. A lot of people are like, hey, did you reach out to Dave saying that you needed to train him? No, I didn't. Did Dave reach out to you specifically for your functional hypertrophy training? Nah, he didn't do that either. It was just two people that had a mutual respect going back and forth on a different subject, knowing very well that we could synergize together, we could complement each other's skill sets, and that's what you guys are currently seeing with this entire Fixing Dave Tate project.